Hi, I'm Andrew Torget with Texas History for Teachers. One of the most important eras in Texas and American history came during the years following World War II, when brave African Americans and Mexican Americans fought back against discrimination to claim their equal rights as American citizens. This period, during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, is known as the Civil Rights era. And although many people don't know it today, Texas was at the very center of those great changes, because the state was the place where both African American and Latino leaders achieved important legal victories in the fight for civil rights. So, what exactly happened in Texas during the Civil Rights era? And how did it change not just Texas, but the entire United States? Well, to start, we should be clear. People of color had been fighting for equal rights in Texas long before the 1950s. But at the end of World War II, something important changed. You see, lots of African Americans and Mexican Americans had served bravely in the U.S. military during World War II, fighting to protect the liberties and freedoms of other people. But when these soldiers came home at the end of the war, they found they could not enjoy those same freedoms themselves in Texas. A black soldier, for example, might be able to eat in any restaurant he wanted in Paris, France, but not in Paris, Texas. Not only that, he could not drink from the same water fountain as white people, he couldn't use the same bathrooms, or sit in the white section of the bus, or have the same job opportunities. His children were sent to segregated and inferior schools just because of their skin color. And he would almost certainly not be allowed to vote, one of the most fundamental rights in a democracy. So, when African American and Mexican American veterans came home after World War II, they began organizing themselves to fight for their own liberties and rights in places like Texas. Mexican Americans and Latinos began joining organizations like the League of United Latin American Citizens, known as L.U.L.A.C, which demanded equal access to good schools for their children and equal treatment before the law. And it worked. They started winning important legal victories. In 1954, L.U.L.A.C won a major case called Hernandez versus Texas, when the United States Supreme Court ruled that the 14th Amendment to the Constitution guaranteed Mexican Americans, and really people of all backgrounds, the right to equal protection under the law. Groups like L.U.L.A.C also helped Latino people register to vote. And this led to a major achievement in 1956, when Henry Gonzalez became the first Mexican American elected to the Texas State Senate in more than 100 years. And Gonzalez would prove to be a fierce supporter of civil rights for all people. And in 1961, he became the first Mexican American from Texas elected to the United States Congress. At the exact same time that all of that was happening, African Americans were also organizing themselves, especially around the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is usually known as the N.A.A.C.P. And the N.A.A.C.P. quickly began challenging discriminatory laws in Texas. One of the most important cases they won involved an African American man named Heman Sweatt, who applied to go to the law school at the University of Texas. Now, Sweatt was a highly qualified candidate, but he had been rejected by UT's law school solely because he was a black man. The N.A.A.C.P. thought that was wrong, so they challenged the case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, where, in 1950, the justices ruled that you could not reject African Americans from law school just because they were black. And that was, as you can imagine, a major victory for black Texans. But it soon became an even bigger victory when, just a few years later, the example set by the Sweatt case helped lead to one of the most important and famous Supreme Court decisions of all time, Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. And in that case, the Supreme Court followed the Texas example and ruled that no school in the entire United States could deny African American children or Latino children or any children access to the same education as white children, which was a tremendous step forward for equal rights. Now, it wasn't all victories. During this period, there was also a lot of resistance to the civil rights movement in Texas. Some of that resistance came from the governor's office and the state legislature in Austin, Texas, both of which tried to oppose these major court decisions. Some of the resistance to civil rights came from people in local communities who did not want African American and Latino kids in the same school as white kids, no matter what the Supreme Court said. But because brave men and women refused to give up, there was a lot that did change, and change for the better. In 1964, the United States Congress passed something called the Civil Rights Act, which said that you could no longer discriminate against anyone because of their race or their sex. Then, in 1965, the U.S. Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, which said that states like Texas could no longer use discriminatory practices to keep people from voting. And so suddenly, hundreds of thousands of black Texans who had previously been denied now finally had the right to vote. And remarkably, the man who signed those bills into law was the first Texan ever to serve as President of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Now, there were so many other things that happened during these years, and the civil rights movement did not end in the mid-1960s. Women, for example, began pushing hard during the 1960s and 1970s to gain their equal rights before the law. And like other groups, they faced great resistance, and they also had great successes, like an amendment to the Civil Rights Act that helped to ensure women had equal access to a college education. One of the most powerful examples of the civil rights era in Texas was the life of Barbara Jordan. An African-American woman, Jordan had grown up in segregation and discrimination in Houston, but she fought for civil rights and she never gave up. And in 1966, just 1 year after the Voting Rights Act, Jordan became the first African-American elected to the Texas State Senate since the 1880s. Then, in 1973, she was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, which made her the first black woman ever to represent Texas in the United States Congress, where she became a powerful voice for defending the rights of women, people of color, and everybody in our country. So in the end, we have to ask ourselves, how was it that so much changed in Texas during the era of the civil rights movement? And how did that help to change the United States in ways that we can still see and feel today?